Hello, everyone. This is the Ophthalmology Business Podcast, where we help you develop your ideal practice with help of other doctors and experts. The topics we cover include marketing, management, leadership, recruitment, HR, mindsets, and more. I am Narain Arul Raja, the founder and one of the co-hosts of this podcast. Every listener of this podcast is welcome to join the Ophthalmology Business Academy, www.obacademy.org. The membership is on us, and it's our gift to you. Today, I'm excited to talk to Dr. Max Colbert, resident physician of NYU Department of Ophthalmology, about importance of an innovative mindset in ophthalmology. Before we get started, Dr. Colbert, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Narain. I'm really excited to be here.
And so that our listeners get to hear about who you are and how you're going to contribute, tell us your story. Like, what got you into medicine? I know you are a resident right now and you have a couple of more years to go. So take us to, how you got started in medicine and, where you are today.
Sure. So I come from a relatively small town in Florida, Pensacola, Florida. And, where I grew up, there were really only so many career options that I saw that created a good lifestyle and, fair income. And I found interesting. A lot of people were lawyers or doctors. And, my father was a lawyer and I didn't see that as being too interesting. So, medicine really stood out to me. And I loved the idea of getting to fix problems with my hands as well. So I knew I wanted to be a surgeon pretty early on. Really from the age of 14, I knew I wanted to be a surgeon. So I kind of set my sights on medical school from the beginning. And initially, I thought I wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. I liked the idea of the big cuts. And, as a former athlete, I liked the idea of getting to work with athletes. But when I stumbled across ophthalmology, I really loved the small surgeries, the microsurgeries, and a lot of technology that ophthalmologists get to use as well. So from the beginning of medical school, I knew I wanted to do ophthalmology, actually.
Oh, that's awesome. That's great. We're going to have an interesting conversation today about importance of an innovative mindset in ophthalmology. And you're kind of living it. So, I felt this would be an awesome conversation for us to have. And for our listeners who don't know, you are currently pursuing an MBA as well, right, Dr. Max?
I actually have already completed my MBA. So I did a dual MD MBA program through NYU.
Oh, perfect. And I think NYU is one of the top business schools. I think one of the top 10 at least.
Yeah, I think it's a top 10. I try not to pay too much attention to rankings.
Absolutely. So what made you want to get your MBA? Like, is this something you decided early on, or is it something you kind of discovered as you were, pursuing your medical career, medical journey, education?
Yeah, I've always been interested in business and finance. I mentioned my dad was a lawyer, but he's also a real estate developer, and he's very entrepreneurial and has this reputation for finding creative solutions to problems. So I guess my interest in business and entrepreneurship really stems from watching him during my childhood. And in college, I was a science major, but I worried that as a scientist, sometimes we can get pigeonholed into just thinking about science and really forgetting about what's going on in the rest of the world. So a lot of my pleasure reading in college revolved around personal finance, banking, marketing, strategy, because I really wanted to build a pretty broad fund of knowledge so that going forward, I understood the world around me and how all the different pieces fit together. And then when I got to medical school, I was very interested in the dual degree from the start. But, it's very expensive. So when NYU announced that they were going to be making medical school tuition free for all students, that then opened up the door financially for me to pursue the MBA. So once they made that announcement, the decision was pretty easy for me.
Makes sense. Did your dad get an MBA as well, or he didn't?
No, he went to law school.
Right.
And
See,
then,
most entrepreneurs don't get an MBA. I run a 200-person company and I don't have an MBA. What the reasons? I know you saw your dad and who didn't have an MBA. Looking back, what were the advantages you feel like you have that perhaps someone who didn't get MBA training doesn't have?
while going to a business school like NYU, you really get exposed to professors who have operated at the top level. Whoever was, my professor for a given course, they literally wrote the book that we were going through. So
Mhm.
it's not just the material you get from them, but their anecdotes, the things that they've done, barriers they ran into, and how did they actually get around those barriers. So I really enjoyed that, getting to learn it straight from the source, who have actually been out there and done the job. Of course, I don't think an MBA is the only way to make it into business, but I think as a doctor, we don't get much exposure outside of a formal curriculum. We're all pretty busy with our training or with our practice. So for me, it was a time to set aside and just focus entirely on my business education and developing as an innovator.
Right. I know a little bit about your background. You are very actively involved with industry, especially like, tech, biotech type industry. Um, how did you get involved early? I mean, before you even became a practicing doctor, you got involved. So how did that happen?
Yeah, in medical school, one of my classmates and good friends, Luke Moretti, had the idea to start a diagnostic device company. And Luke is interested in neurology, but he knew that I was going into ophthalmology and the device would be used within the eye care industry. He knew that I had an interest in business and that I was going to business school. So he brought me on to help with, early business development, marketing strategy, go-to-market strategy, fundraising, writing the business plan. And I've really loved being involved in early stage entrepreneurship because I think it's a creative outlet for me. Medicine itself can sometimes feel very algorithmic. And, you can kind of feel like a cog in the wheel. A
Mm,
patient presents with disease A, so I treat them with drug X. There's a correct answer, right?
yes.
But in entrepreneurship, there are no right answers. There's general directions, accepted practices, advice from mentors that will increase your odds of success, reduce risk. But at the end of the day, there's 1,000 different directions you can take your business in. So whether you're designing a surgical device, investing in an ASC, building your own practice, you really get to exercise your creative muscles when bringing your dream to life.
Right. You know, if you are listening to this podcast and wondering, why are we doing this podcast? It's just, I believe that sometimes thinking differently and getting a totally different perspective is a good thing. So you, Max, are bringing a different perspective. I mean, most people who are listening to this own practices, and they do the same thing, more or less every day, whether it's with the teams or with taking care of patients. But you took a kind of slightly different path, and you are, of course, early in that journey. So hopefully 20 years from now, when I interview you again, hopefully you will share some interesting failures and hopefully a few successes along the way. So it's good that you have that spark and that interested in thinking differently right from the start. I know you are involved with a company by the name of Flying L Partners. How did you come to work with them? Like, how did you get involved? How were you introduced to them?
Yeah. So for those listening that aren't familiar, Flying L Partners is a ophthalmology venture capital firm based out of Orange County, and it's composed of Bill Link, Dick Lindstrom, and Andy Corley, who are three giants in the field of ophthalmology. So one of the advisors for the startup I was working with is Vance Thompson from Vance Thompson Vision in South Dakota. And we were speaking one day, and he mentioned that his son, Joel Thompson, was actually in business school at NYU as well. He was a year above me. So he told me to keep an eye out for Joel when I was starting. And on day one of orientation, which was over Zoom at the time, Joel popped up on the screen as an orientation leader, and he was introducing himself. And in business school, the summer internship is a big component. It's where a lot of people, you end up getting your formal job offers upon graduation from the summer internship. And Joel says that over the summer, he interned for an ophthalmology venture capital firm. And I just thought, oh my gosh, that is exactly what I'm looking for. I definitely want to do an internship, but, I was worried about, if I went and interned with McKinsey, for example, would I learn any skills that were directly applicable to my career? Well, here's this opportunity to do something in the business world that is in my field of ophthalmology. So I asked him to connect me with the guys at Flying L. He connected me with the COO, Javon Gore, who is actually a NYU Law School alum. And then he connected me with Dick Lindstrom, and they just thought it was a perfect fit, a future ophthalmologist that's interested in learning about venture capital and the industry side of ophthalmology. So, as we're finalizing things, Javon mentioned, you can do everything virtual if you want. The pandemic was still going on. You can stay in New York. We'll send you some projects and you let us know when you're done, and you can present your work. But that's not really everything I wanted out of the experience. I wanted to get to know them and to meet with them, see how they think, how do they approach solving problems. So I actually fibbed a little bit, and I told him that I was going to be out in Orange County anyway. My girlfriend is from Irvine, and that part's true. So I said that I was going to be spending the summer with her family out there in Orange County. So don't worry about it. I'm going to be there anyway. So if there's anything I can do in person, you let me know. And I like telling that story because I think it's important to recognize that sometimes you have to make your own luck a little bit, make your own opportunities. And so I rented an Airbnb for the summer. I just went out to Orange County, and I had a lunch with the team, really got to know them and built relationships with them. And then they also mentioned that they were sponsors of this big meeting out there, Ophthalmology Technology Summit, where all the CEOs of pharma companies and biotech companies and all the famous KOLs were going to be there. And I walk in as this little old medical student, and people are just wondering, what the heck is this guy doing here? But I think it stood out, and people were actually really interested to find out why I was there. And one of the people I ended up speaking with was Anne-Marie Hipsley, who is the founder and CEO of Ace Vision Group, who's developing a laser procedure for the correction of presbyopia. And she actually offered for me to come on with them and start working on some research projects as a research coordinator. And, I was organizing international research studies and, speaking at meetings, publishing in trade journals. So none of that would have happened if I hadn't just, told a little bit of a fib and went out to the county to be there in person.
Exactly. That's a wonderful story. I think the thing about entrepreneurship is people think somebody has this master plan and it just works out. It's never like that. You have to take 100 steps, and then out of those 100 steps, 49 will fail, or even 70 will fail. But the few that succeed, you just build on it and you make something of it. You scale it.
That's exactly true.
Yeah. So, and unfortunately, these are things that I learned the hard way by making those mistakes hundreds of times. But that's just, how it works. Like there's no like a master plan that somebody can say, here it is, go, you execute it, it'll all work out. It doesn't exist.
Exactly.
What was it like working with Dr. Dick Lindstrom, Bill Link, and Andy Curly, correct?
Corley, yes.
Curly, yes.
So my responsibilities, I was primarily working with the portfolio companies. So, one example, I was working with one of their pharmaceutical companies that was interested in expanding into the myopia space. So I was doing market research on developments in the space, really looking for any potential acquisition targets. And I also worked with one of John Berdahl's companies, Equinox, who was preparing for a fundraise. So I was preparing marketing materials, did some financial modeling as well. And, going into this, I knew that it was going to be a life-changing experience working with these guys, but I don't think I fully appreciated how important they were in the field of ophthalmology from the start. So one of my big projects was actually just documenting the history of their contributions to the field of ophthalmology and in particular, refractive cataract surgery. And, they have been a part of so many technologies that we take for granted these days. They all the way back to bringing radial keratotomy to the US. And then, when that fell out of favor, bringing ALK to the US, femtosecond lasers for LASIK, and then using it for cataract surgery. And Andy actually is responsible for lobbying Congress to get the approval for private pay for premium lenses for premium cataract surgery. So, that entire category of premium cataract surgery wouldn't exist if it weren't for these three guys. So realizing what a profound impact a small group of people or one person can have on the field was really inspiring to me. Something else that really stood out to me as I learned about them was that the same names popped up over and over again with, all the different companies they built, like Eric Weinberg, who is now the CCO of RxSight. He helped bring ALK to the US through his relationship with Jose Barricare down in Bogota. And Ron Kurtz, who is now the president and CEO of RxSight, and that's one of Flying L's portfolio companies, founded one of Bill's earliest investments, Intralaze, when Bill was at Versant Ventures. And then the two of them also founded LensX, which they were all involved with as well. So it dawned on me that they had this dream team and all of them were experts in different domains. No one was the best at everything, but they each fulfilled an important role. So I began really evaluating myself and what is it that I love doing? What am I really good at? And what problem can I solve? And I think that's an important exercise for anyone to do, is really look inward and ask, what value do I add? What problem can I solve that no one else can solve or wants to solve? And then go and be the very best at that one thing.
That's awesome. Listening to you speak, a few things that just jump out at me, as an entrepreneur, and I was an accidental entrepreneur, meaning I got fired 4 times in a row and then I became an entrepreneur. Few things I know about entrepreneurs. One, they're very curious. They're always interested in learning. And they're also interested in learning, off the beaten path. So you didn't take the regular path. You took you went off the regular path and you learned. The other thing is, I think they're very persistent. They don't give up. I bet the 3 names you named probably, had to, struggle a lot, but still they knew what they wanted to accomplish and they stuck with it. So it's interesting to bring a different perspective, a different way of looking at the world. Because sometimes in medical school, you are told to, comply, right? Like you said, be that effective cog. There's always a perfect answer for every problem. So you're supposed to memorize it or learn it and just do it again and again and again. And entrepreneurs are just the opposite. They don't necessarily enjoy doing the same things again and again, but they're very interested in figuring out those patterns, those new ways of doing things, the new ways of looking at things. And I think it can be very powerful, right? So, and I know some of our listeners are entrepreneurs, because if you're owning a practice, you decided to take matters in your own hand, create your own way of doing things, set your own rules. So, I mean, most entrepreneurs, I think, get in there because it gives them freedom. It gives them freedom to do their own thing, but at the same time have a lot of impact.
Yeah, that's precisely why I'm interested in entrepreneurship, is really just getting out there and solving problems and getting to be creative. And I do think, they wanted me to document the history of their contributions, not to show that it was easy, but actually the opposite, what you were saying, that it's very hard, all the roadblocks they ran into and how they got around them. So that was really what they wanted me to capture, was how difficult bringing new technologies to the market can be.
Absolutely. What did you take away from business school that our listeners would benefit from?
I made it a point to get a broad education through the courses I selected. So, I learned basic data mining and machine learning, managerial accounting, basic finance, pricing, marketing, business law, all of which are essential skills for an ophthalmologist, really in any practice setting. I even took a real estate investment course and an entire discussion centered around investing in ASCs. But I think the course that stands out to me as really changing the way that I think was a design thinking course. And for those that aren't familiar with design thinking, it's a concept started by a gentleman, David Kelly, who founded the renowned design firm IDEO out in the Bay Area. And the process is really centered around the concept of designing through a lens of empathy for the end user. Without understanding what others are seeing and feeling and experiencing, designing can be a pretty pointless task. So IDEO really emphasizes putting yourself in the end user's shoes to understand what it is they actually need. So in medicine, that may be patient-centered. You could look at patients as being the experts. And I think physicians sometimes, we can think we know what the problem is and we know how to solve it, but sometimes we're too close to the problem, or we're not looking at it through the lens of the people being affected by it. So going straight to the source can be a really a fruitful way of looking at a problem. And so a good example of this, IDEO was actually, they were contracted by some hospital that wanted to revamp their patient experience. And so the firm decided, we want to have someone admitted to your hospital, and we want you to treat them exactly the way you would treat any other patient, wake them up in all hours of the night to check vital signs, nothing different. And at the end of the project, they come to present their findings. And I think the hospital execs were probably expecting, some fancy PowerPoint presentation with infographics and here are the pain points, here are the solutions. But what they actually got was a 6-minute video clip of the ceiling above the hospital bed. And the point they were trying to make is that this is your patient's experience. They're laying in bed staring at fluorescent lights all day. They're bored out of their minds. And what this prompted the hospital to do was actually just redesign the bedrooms themselves. So they changed the flooring so that the flooring in the rooms was different than in the hallways. So that gave patients a sense of ownership over their room. My room is not contiguous with the rest of the hospital. This is my space. And they redesigned the walls so that family members, children, grandchildren could write on the wall. They could draw pictures so that instead of staring at the lights all day, they had something else to look at that was more personal. So sometimes asking the patient or putting yourself in the shoes of the patient can open your eyes to a problem that you didn't really know existed. But it's not just patients as well. If you're implementing a new system in your practice, you also need to think about your techs. You need to think about your scrub nurses, your office manager. And, what are the pain points they're running into? What are the workarounds they're having to use in their day-to-day? So another good example comes from another design firm that was contracted by a medical device producer who was designing some data entry device for nurses to use during intraoperatively to enter data about the patient. and they designed it to be a two-handed device, something like an iPad. But the firm said, let's have someone come to the OR and actually see how you're going to be using this thing. And what they realized was the procedure itself was done under conscious sedation. The patient was not under general anesthesia. So the patient was very nervous and anxious, and they noticed that the nurses were actually holding one of the patient's hand throughout the entire procedure. And so they realized this two-handed device they had designed was not going to really work for this. They needed something the nurses could use one-handed. So they redesigned the entire product to be a one-handed device, and it had a pretty successful launch. So really thinking about who are you designing this system, this device, this new procedure for, and what are the problems that they're going to face? So that's kind of the concept of design thinking. But what I loved about this course was that it gave a really structured way to go through the innovation process. I think going into it, I thought there were innovators and then there's the rest of us. Some people just have this innate ability to find problems and develop unique solutions for them. But, everyone can innovate. You just have to know how to go through the process. So this course and the book that we went through is actually written by my professor. It's called Disrupt by Luke Williams. And I would encourage anyone to take a look at it because it really gives you a structured platform that you or your team could go through if you're trying to solve some problem in your practice. And the ways in which we create the solutions, he instructs us to find the cliches. What are the things we take for granted, and how can we flip those on their head? So the three ways of doing that are to deny the status quo. So an example of that, let's say treating dry eye. Traditionally, we think to treat dry eye, we have to intervene at the ocular surface with eye drops. But what if we could treat dry eye without touching the ocular surface? That would be denying that cliche. And that's exactly what Oyster Point Pharmaceuticals has done with their new nasal spray, Tyrvaya. They said, what if we could treat dry eye with a nasal spray? And it's been a complete success. And the other ways to flip the script are scaling and inverting. So you can scale up or down, and you can invert. So an example of that is, I believe, in the premium cataract space. Traditional cataract reimbursement has really plummeted over the last few decades, which has led ophthalmologists to have to see more and more patients, spend less time with each one, do more and more cases as quickly as possible. But what if we focused on doing fewer cases? What if we saw fewer patients and spent more time with them, but they paid us more? So this really underlies the practice strategies of the cash pay premium practices we're seeing these days. Patients pay you a lump sum upfront, and you use all technology available to them at no additional cost. You spend more time with them, and they really get a more premium experience. And that's proven to be a pretty successful business model.
That's awesome. Thank you for talking about like all the things you learned from business school, specifically around design thinking. As we come to a close, I want to ask one last question. Why do you think it is important for ophthalmologists to be business savvy?
While raw business savvy may traditionally be thought to be, more essential for success in private practice, I really believe a business background is equally beneficial to ophthalmologists in any practice setting. Since the 90s, the number of healthcare administrators has exploded in the US. In fact, I think there's now 10 administrators to every one physician out there who've never cared for a single patient. So there's this massive disconnect between the priorities of administrators and physicians. So we desperately need more doctors armed with economic prowess to bridge this gap and fight for sensible policies that prioritize patient care while taking financial realities into consideration. So I recently heard of an oncologist who is contractually obligated to see 30 patients a day.
Mhm.
Now, for ophthalmologists, that isn't too high of a number. Some of us are, seeing 60, 70 patients in a day. But for an oncologist, after charting and billing, that necessitates that this oncologist can't really spend more than 10 minutes with any given patient. And I, for one, would expect a little more face time with my oncologist if I was battling cancer. So consolidation of healthcare and the pressure that's being put on physicians from administrators and from payers, I really believe are starting to harm the patient experience a little bit. Personally, I'm concerned for my future in medicine, but I am really inspired by my colleagues who are beginning to rise up against this system. I believe we've hit a bit of an inflection point with, the prior authorization nonsense that's been happening and decreased reimbursement. Medicare reduced reimbursement by 8.5% this past year. But I think doctors are finally having enough and beginning the fight to regain control of our healthcare system so that we can return to putting patients first. So I really just want to call on anyone listening to learn the business side of ophthalmology so that we can have more physicians in positions of power to right the ship. It's not too late, but we really have to act now before irreparable damage has been done.
Thank you, Max. I really enjoyed our conversation today, and I learned a ton. And I think you brought a totally different perspective from the typical guests we have had on the show. So thank you for that. We appreciate your time and your perspective very much. I also want to take a moment to thank our listeners. We appreciate each and every one of you. We cannot do what we do without you. If you like our podcast, kindly share it with your friends and on social media. Also, please don't forget to write a review on iTunes or Google Play. Your reviews will help other doctors and practice owners find us. Till we meet again, wishing all of you an amazing week ahead.